Welcome to Cultivate the Ordinary podcast, curious conversations for the anxious, frustrated, and bored. I'm Travis.
And I'm Jessie. So often we're held captive by screens, schedules, and media that's mind-numbing and polarizing. This leaves us seeing dimly through a fog. We want to spark more imagination and a better awareness of God's presence in the everyday.
Join us on a fun journey of discovery and curiosity as we look at the ordinary through the lenses of joy, wonder, beauty, and hope.
All right. Well, welcome to the podcast today. This is going to be a fun one for me. I'm interviewing a colleague of mine that I work with at America's Kids Belong, and we'll get into a little bit of that. But the topic today is really about Leah Busboom's creative writing. She's a self-published author on Amazon, has won awards for her indie writing. And so that's really going to be kind of the focus point today of just creativity and her writing and her craft. But what kind of one of the things that really fascinates me that is I want to put side by side in contrast is, so Leah's has her master's degree in physics, worked for 22 years for IBM, doing coding and then all the other advancements that she went along in that. And then now at America's Kids Belong, works in the operations side with Salesforce and some of the tech stuff, and then the foster-friendly app that America's Kids is pioneering. So Leah's got this interesting, there's this dichotomy between science, technology, and then creative nonfiction writing. So I love that. And so before I have her share a little bit more about herself, I have to think of some things that we have in common. I know we're both from the Dakotas. I'm from North, she's from South. Both of our state tree is probably the telephone pole. Although I don't even know who has more trees, and that's another thing to debate. We're both Minnesota Vikings fans, so we share that misery. And
yeah, yes,
you could write some dark novels about being the Vikings fan.
True.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of where we're going today. Leah, great to have you on. Just tell us anything else you want to share about yourself.
Well, Travis, thank you very much. I'm excited to be on your podcast. Well, a lot of people do react like you are with my background, my tech background. And to be honest, parts of my life I would never have admitted I was a romance novelist. You get a really side-like view from people, like, what? Romance novel writers or authors kind of take a beating, But anyway, I've embraced it, and I said, this is, who I am, and I don't apologize for it anymore.
So when did you, we're going to maybe work our way backwards a little bit, but when did you actually start, writing published romance novels?
2017
Okay.
was my first one, and I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but I worked for a really, what I would call not a nice group of people.
Okay.
And I like working with people who respect you and who appreciate you, and these people didn't do that. So I quit. Okay. First job I ever quit in my whole life. Maybe other than detasseling corn. But anyway, I quit. So I'm sitting at home going, oh yeah, what do you do next? I just couldn't take another day with those people. So I started writing a book. I'd always been an avid romance reader. Always. Back in the days, I don't know, this maybe is funny, but you used to be able to get these Harlequin romances, and you get 4 books every month. And it would be, every month you'd look forward to your 4 books. I don't think they do that anymore. But anyway, that was how the format worked. So I always read those, and in my mind, I thought, I can write one of these. I know the formula. I kind of know how it works. So I started writing my first book, my very, very first book. And then after I got to what I thought was, I'm done. Yeah, I wrote the book. And then I thought, how many words does it need to be?
Uh-huh.
Like what's a novel?
Sure.
What's the length for this? I wasn't even halfway there. I was like 20,000 words, and even short novels are 40 or more. So that was an eye opener. And I
Uh-huh.
just kind of I'd call myself bumbling my way through,
Mhm.
determined to get this done and published, and then kind of go from there. And boy, did I learn a lot of things. I mean, it wasn't a horrible book. Don't get me wrong. It was good.
Hmm.
But, I didn't have the concept, well, do I want another book in the series? Or is
Hmm.
this a standalone book? And, do you take a character from here and then introduce them over there? And it just very messy. I just kind of did it,
Sure.
shoehorned it together and said, oh,
Yeah.
here's your book, right? The other thing that was an eye opener, Travis, to be honest, is I always thought, okay, I'm writing contemporary romance, right?
Hmm.
Modern day romance. Oh my goodness. Did I even realize I was competing against millions of
Mm.
books? You know,
Well, I bet it's a huge
that a
genre.
big, broad, too broad.
Hmm.
Start writing about hockey romance or start writing about, something nichey because you'll have a chance.
That's a great stop-off point. Okay, I have to ask this. Is that why? Okay, because Amish romance novels seem to be a big thing. And I don't know if you, I mean, this is your competition here, but I'm sitting around thinking, okay, how much of that is driven by the author going, I need a real small niche to really stand out,
It could
or
be.
how many Americans are sitting around going, man, just I am just always dreaming about Jebediah and I mean, and a
I know what you
buggy, and
mean.
I mean, is there a mystery to Amish romance that like what's driving that?
I don't know. But let me at least cite something I do know is there's a man named Alex Newton. I believe he's British.
Okay.
Anyway, he writes these reports where he tells you what's the hottest niches.
Hmm.
Okay. And he came out probably 2 to 3 months ago saying hockey romance is the hottest romance selling today.
Hockey romance.
Hockey. And do you know, Travis, I just felt like it was such a huge sense of, I'm missing out. I don't have a hockey romance. So I sat down and wrote one.
Really?
Yeah, because you feel like, oh my gosh, the competition is just there. I have, they'll leave me behind. It's really a, concern when you're,
So to write, okay, I know you're from South Dakota, so hockey's not a foreign thing to you.
no,
But
not
did
at
you
all.
have to research some about hockey to, I mean, that's I never
Well,
knew that. That's
yeah, interesting, right? It contains hockey, them playing, but I have a husband who's a sports enthusiast, so
okay.
that
So
was
he
easy.
was your consultant for any hockey.
He did. He read through it
Nice.
and,
Okay.
okay. And I even had to say, well, would this guy have done that on his skates? And, would
Nice.
that have happened? So,
That is
but
interesting. Hockey romance.
it's just interesting how different trends do drive the market. And I don't know what's causing, I can't speak to the Amish thing, but
Yeah.
billionaire used to be big. Oh my gosh, if you weren't writing about a billionaire, you would never have a
Okay, yeah.
very popular book.
So these almost subject or targets that just move around. Okay, we've exhausted billionaires. We haven't exhausted Amish romance yet, apparently.
Yeah,
But
maybe not
at some
yet.
point, maybe baseball romance got phased out. Now
Oh
we're into
yeah, I've written a
hockey.
baseball one. I've
I
written
mean,
neat. Yeah,
gosh, I mean, is it the
yeah.
Canadians right now that are really? I don't know. So, wow,
But
this
you're
is.
right. It's such funny little niches come out, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, I better write that one.
I would never have guessed that. It's just
That's
like, wow, that's so fascinating. So, okay, so that's kind of the present where your writing is and so that, and again we'll talk more about that, but where did then like so clearly an outlet at the time for you with what was going on at work, and like I needed
Mhm.
good entry into that phase, but going even further back in your life, was creative writing a thing for you? Was it something that you
Oh yeah,
okay.
I always did. I wrote
Hmm.
poetry at one part of my life. I had quite
Cool.
a bit of poems I'd written. Um, I actually, way back when I still lived in Minnesota, I submitted a manuscript to a publisher, and they were very positive. I mean, they didn't just say, "Oh my gosh, don't ever submit again." I
Yep.
felt like they said, your writing had promise and stuff like that. But to be honest, at certain points of my life, it just kind of life got in the way.
Mm,
You know, I didn't have time to just sit and crank out books.
sure.
I was too busy with work or too busy with, family life, whatever. Um, so not until I finally decided that day in March of 2017, I'm not going to work for these folks anymore. That's when I finally had time to think about writing as something I
Okay.
wanted to just do more
Sure.
full time.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So, and then like kind of getting back to how I set this up where, this interesting contrast of where, the whole left brain, science, technology, IBM, that whole world, and then, this creative fictional writing that's right brain and all of that side. Talk a little bit about like, I mean, that contrast or like a little bit that you want to share around like because some would maybe say, hey, is that an outlet for some of the other side? Because I do believe we may lean more into left or right brain, but as image bearers of God who created us, with
Yeah.
full right, that we do have both obviously all the faculties. So what would you say about sort of that contrast of those worlds?
Well, it's an interesting question because I always say I either have my right brain on or my left. I I have trouble hopping back and forth.
Mm,
So kind of what my routine is I get up real early in the morning and I try to write for a certain amount of time, maybe an hour,
mm,
hour and a half, something like that. Totally immersing myself in writing. Then I switch my hat, you know, and I start working on Salesforce issues.
mm-hmm,
And believe me, I can't write when I have that brain active.
sure.
It's like
Mm-hmm,
if I try to write, it feels real stilted and not creative or not, just really stilted. And you read
right.
it and go, that was awful. Look what you just wrote.
Right. Yeah.
Because I do think I have two mindsets that you can't just hop back and forth. When I'm in the Salesforce mindset, I could probably work all day doing that and
Mm-hmm.
great, crank out and do stuff. But if you ask me to write a creative paragraph at that point, I'd probably say, oh,
Yeah.
I'm having trouble doing that, you
What's
know.
it like also going the other direction of where maybe you spend a good chunk of writing, you're taken off in this imaginative world, and then now, oh, back to work. I mean, is there a little bit of also hard transition back into like the Salesforce stuff too? Or is it more the other direct where it's like,
It's worse the other
yeah, I
direction.
would imagine.
You
Yep.
know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden your creativity and spontaneity is gone because Salesforce doesn't need that, obviously. Um, but if I go and your question is, I think if you go from writing to Salesforce, is it as hard? It's not
Mm-hmm.
as hard. And that world drives me by what we have to do that day and then
Mm-hmm.
people having problems.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of tech support in the background.
Yep.
I can't get this to work. I don't know what's going on here. So, I have to be able to just leap in and do it.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So, and then, we've kind of talked about what led you into the romance genre of, you had that was something you loved, romance novels, so that makes sense, is
Yes.
that why you weren't writing about pro wrestling or something.
Yeah.
But
Right.
what so tell us more about your books. Where do you get inspiration from your characters, the stories, kind of? Yeah.
Well, like I said, when I first started out, I thought the genre was contemporary romance. So I literally just wrote a contemporary romance book, not really focusing on any of these tropes. Tropes are a really important thing in your writing, and I sort of had one, but it wasn't strong. So really strong tropes are enemies to lovers, falling
And
in
what,
love with
I'm sorry,
your.
what is a trope?
A trope is like a theme.
Okay.
a theme that the story is going to follow. And, enemies to lovers. They're going to start out hating each other. They're going to end up loving each other. That kind of thing. The butt heads at first. Grumpy sunshine is a big one. The guy's grumpy and the girl's this light, sunshiny character, or opposite. I've written opposite too, where the girl was grumpy. That was kind of fun to do. Falling in love with your brother's best friend. The one I just finished was Mistaken Identity. Oh my gosh, did I have fun with that one? You could just, it was so fun. So tropes, really important. Then the second thing is, do I want to write in a serious vein or do I want to write humor? That was, and my first books were serious. I mean, they might have every now and then a little humorous bit in them.
Sure.
So I wrote, my very first series I wrote was The Connor Brothers. It's a series set in Minnesota. Turned out to be 12 books. And I could just see that family. Travis, the Minnesota way of talking with,
yeah.
Minnesota, yeah.
I
could see the family. I could understand that family. I had grandpa the certain way. And, it was so much fun to write. I felt like I was back living in Minnesota again.
I bet,
and I've had a lot of Minnesotans say, hey, you got that right. But it was a serious vein, I wasn't trying to write comedy at that point, romantic comedy. And it was small town romance too, right? Everybody knows everybody's business and, that kind of stuff. But then I wrote a series of romantic comedies and I thought, can I really write comedy? So the very first one in my series, and I'm still writing it, the series is still going on, was called Shopping for the Grump. And oh my gosh, I could just see all these situations. She was a personal shopper. He was a grumpy businessman. Oh, it just lends itself to all kinds of stuff. Grumpy sunshine, right? Well, a situation of when I see something or hear something, I put it away and I think, you know what? That would be effective in a book if I can figure out how to work it in appropriately. So the kind of serious side of this story, even though the story is mostly funny, was his dad had died unexpectedly and he had to take over the company. And he used to play golf with his dad every Saturday morning. And, he's never really dealt with that grief. I'm going to probably start crying here because it's actually a really touching thing. My husband and I went golfing and I drive the cart. I'm not a golfer, but anyway, we drove up and he, putted. And as we were leaving the green, there was this bench. And I said, oh, let's stop and look at this bench. It was so pretty. Well, a group of golfers had put it there for their golfing buddy who had passed away. And it was so touching and sweet. So in the story, she's charged with what should he get his mom and his sister for Christmas? And she decides that bench would be good for all of them to acknowledge the dad that had passed away. So I used it and quite effectively, I thought, and I've had a lot of people comment on it and say, that was a real bench. You really saw one? And I said, I did. Wow. Yeah, it was cool.
I love that story and that and how, even you getting emotional of that you have this real world discovery and it's someone's sacred thing, and you're sort of imaginatively borrowing that, putting that into your imaginative creation, and there's still like a reverence for that, like that's still like coming out in you now, like that's cool that there was
this man that they love so much. And the healing process in my book, you always want your character to have an emotional arc, right? Well, this guy had never dealt with his dad's death, but he sat on that bench and cried. In my book.
Wow. So do you also find like And I know there's a lot of things even subconsciously that we do and we're not even aware, like it can come out in writing, maybe it's, but do you feel like you have noticed in times where, not that you're necessarily trying to work something out from your past or maybe redeem something, but has that ever where you kind of like there is something that you're kind of dealing, like maybe because I could see redemption happening for me, like I could see, I don't
Oh
write
yeah.
fiction, but I
Mm-hmm.
could see moments of like, maybe you were a football player in high school and you never,
Right.
you never got the ball, you dropped a winning pass. Well, now here's a chance you can write a
Yeah.
story about, and it's kind of about you, like, but has that ever creeped in? Like, do you feel like where you're,
I I do.
hmm
Um, Situations that arise that are based on my background.
yep,
Um, I was an only female second line manager and dealt with a lot of situations where, you know, kind of overlooked.
hmm
You could say an idea, present it, just sort of say it at a meeting. Everybody kind of go, oh yeah, okay, good idea. And then the next guy says it, and
mm.
everybody's like,
Oh,
what an
he
idea,
said it.
because he said it, not she said it. I've dealt with that a lot.
I bet.
Um, so a lot of times in my books, the female character may deal with some of those kind of things. I wrote about a female CEO that um she had a lot of that kind of stuff, trying to walk over her and
hmm
things like that. Even though there's still comedy in my books, you probably think, man, she writes dark stuff. I don't. But you're right. I can feel that my experiences come out in the book, you
Hmm.
know, a
Sure.
lot.
Yeah. And I've got to think too, like there's so much of that is also healing too. I mean, just being creative is like a really healthy thing and doing that in an outlet, but also the ability to kind of like even if it's like character formation and you're doing something that sort of also feels redemptive to your past or whatever, or it's like overcoming that has got to be also a source of healing in a way.
Yes, yes, how true. And I think all of my characters have a little bit of me or someone I've met or my husband or they're in there. And surprisingly, I've surprised myself. I wrote this book where she was the CEO
hmm
and her niece came and visited her. She was 8 years old, her niece. And everybody commented how they loved that child I wrote, you know.
hmm
And I had so much fun writing her and her little friend George. And, it's just, it was so much fun. And, I think it's because I never had kids that I wanted to write about
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
A personal experience that, okay, that was my kid. I managed to write one.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Because you've never had kids. Yeah.
Yeah, I went, no,
Um, and then I imagine too, like these works, there becomes I mean, I've written a couple books, but like the sort of the pride of like that's you created that thing and like and then when you get feedback, I mean, I think that's one of to me, what I've always said about being an author
yes,
is there's
yes,
something, it also feels so lonely whenever because I think a lot of creative work is lonely because you don't necessarily see the outcome of how it's impacted people. I think of like if you're in a band and maybe you're on stage in front of an audience, you
that's
know,
true.
you can kind
That's
of see the
true.
impact, whatever. But
Hmm.
a lot of writing to me feels like you just don't know. But
I,
yeah, any stories or things around that where you have gotten feedback or you've
well, when I first started, I always gave the analogy. I feel like I'm singing to an empty auditorium.
hmm,
I'm singing, but like you said, there's no faces out there to look at. There's no one
sure,
clapping. There's no
right,
reactions that
right,
you know of other than getting reviews,
hmm,
you know. And while reviews are heartwarming and good, although
hmm
you get bad ones too,
hmm
um, it's still not the same, right? You didn't have that. What did it mean to you? What did that
right,
story mean to you? But
yeah,
fortunately, I've been super lucky. A lot of my readers have reached out.
hmm,
Um, Funny one was a little girl reached out. Her mom had read the book and she read it. She was 13, I think. And she said, oh, I just love your books. They were so much fun, stuff like that. And she says, "Do you have any swag?"
Do you have any swag?
was cute, so cute. Well, I did make stickers for this one book. So I said, I'll send you a couple stickers. And then she even reached back out and wanted some for her sister. It was so cute. It was just funny. I just
That
thought,
is
well,
great.
isn't that sweet? You know,
That is awesome.
but I've had people who have said, your humor helped lift me in a bad time. You know,
Mm.
and isn't that great to be able to pull someone from a bad time and make them
Oh,
feel
for
good
sure.
for. So I've also had other situations where my readers said how they could relate to the situation I described. So uh, in romantic comedy, there's a fine line between being sort of silly comedy and real comedy that you can chuckle and laugh at and relate to,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
I've read some books by authors where is all they do is have the girl trip and fall. Like she does this 100 times. And you're like, okay, yeah, it was funny the first few times, but then after she does it, 59 times, it's like, is that really funny anymore?
Right.
You have to think about what's funny.
Hmm.
Well, the girl in my Shopping for the Girl, my romantic comedy, she's running to the interview, right, with this guy. And she wears these tennis shoes to drive the car because, I don't want to wear my high heels. So she gets there, she slips on the high heels, and she starts walking into the building and she's going, boop, 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 boop. One heel is higher than the other. She pulled two black shoes, but they weren't matched. So she has to go to this interview wearing mismatched shoes. I mean, they match on the outside, but the heels aren't the
The
same. And
heels.
so have you ever tried to walk when you're, you know, and I describe how the secretary glares at her and she kind of hobbles into the interview.
It
I
sounds
mean,
like a Lucille Ball scene or
yeah,
something.
exactly. She thinks, oh my gosh, she's going to think I'm so strange. But people have written back to me and said, I could see that happening. And I've done that before, kind of a thing.
That's cool that you're getting feedback even on just, yeah, on just characters and these little moments that are light and all that. That's a different type of feedback too than, yeah, you're the different genres. So man, that's cool. Um, well, you've already talked about like your creative process, which it sounds like is tends towards, because I've talked about this in other podcasts about creativity. So I'm not going to go all deep into this again, but like there's definitely at least two types of creativity we see a lot of times with writing, and probably other forms as well, but where it's more of the process driven, like
Yeah.
yep, scheduled. I think you and I have probably talked about this before too, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna have this discipline, and I'm
Hmm.
going to carve out time, and that's good. And at some point, just doing that for you, it sounds like it has. That's partially training your left, like to move into that right brain side, like to just get the
Yeah.
wheels going.
And doing it early in the morning kind of tells you, oh, now it's time to
Yep.
write. But here's an example. Have you ever heard in fiction writing where there's two types of authors? There's plotters,
Okay.
gotta have an outline, gotta have all these details, or
Hmm.
there's pantsters, fly by the seat of your pants
Yeah.
people.
Hmm.
Well, when you think me with my background, I'd be a plotter.
Yeah. I was
I
just gonna. That would be my guess.
Nope, I'm a pantster.
That's fascinating, huh?
And I say, my characters tell me where the story should go.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
look at me like, what?
Yeah.
But it really is true. You'll start writing, and every now and then I will have an outline, but a lot of times I just, oh
Hmm.
no, that's not going to work. Let's do this, you know. So I'm much more spontaneous in my writing.
Yeah,
Um,
I love that. That makes so much sense to me. I can really relate to that because I think because some would also say like part of the like if you're really process driven to like okay, this is the amount of time I write. People talk about it's also how then they feel like they yield getting to something good. Like it's almost like if I do enough writing, something good will be distilled out.
that's true. That's true.
I'm more in the camp my own self, and there's been a lot of authors that have written about this way, where it's more they see creativity as almost this strange mystery, this strange almost force that they talk about
Mhm.
obeying it and meaning like, and it sounds really weird, but I think it's like you can say like we all know what it's like to have like a sudden idea. You don't know where the idea came from.
You don't know where it came from. Just Yeah,
and
that's
I
right.
get the idea of obeying because okay, I can't lose this. I need to now go and sort of, and then I get immersed in this whole thing that has a life of its own. And it
That's true.
sounds like that's kind of where you start going after you get into it. It's like the characters start to like, and that's really cool because someone that I don't think that understands the process, like I don't really, of writing fiction, that probably thinks, wow, I mean, these aren't real characters, but you're telling me that they start kind of, the script starts getting out of the writer's hands and into like, but it's that world of
Almost. Yeah,
imagination.
because I had the grumpy guy dealing with his dad's death, and then that sort of like, I could see where it needed to go.
Yeah. Well, and yeah.
Once I had that sort of set, introducing new characters. Sometimes just a character comes in.
Mhm.
Oh, this is where we need this kind of an
Mhm.
interaction. Boom, here's this new
Sure.
character. Oh, wow, I love this new character. I've got to write
Mhm.
more about him.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and I've shared this probably a few times. So, but like kind of to that point of where I know like C.S. Lewis talks about in the Chronicles of Narnia, for years he had this this vision for Mr. Tumnus, the font, some of the settings, but just could never tie the rest of the plot and the storyline together. But he has
yeah,
this beautiful line where he says, and this is later in his life. I don't think he wrote Chronicles of Narnia young. He says at one point, Aslan came bounding in. So and it's as if this
yeah,
allegorical Christ figure, central figure of Narnia, almost comes into Lewis's mind itself mysteriously, and now the story starts to come together.
right,
So,
right. It's funny how that will happen to you. I also call the middle of the story the murky middle.
mm,
You sometimes kind of get lost in that a little bit. You know how
yeah,
it's going to start, the meet cute, all this good stuff, you know how it's going to end. But what's going to happen in the middle? And this other author that he does a lot of author coaching,
hmm,
and he says, if you don't have some angst and you don't have kind of a trial that they're going through, difficulty,
hmm,
it's just a diary. And
hmm,
that really hit me. What my very, very first book, I kept thinking, let's just think of examples of what they did.
hmm,
We did this, and that was funny and interesting that we did this, but no sense of how did that play into them, their
hmm,
emotional state, their, helping the grump heal from his dad's death, all
hmm,
those kind of things. I wasn't good at until I heard that,
hmm.
otherwise it's just a diary.
Just a
And I thought,
diary.
how true,
Yeah, yeah. Gives
isn't
it.
that a good
Yeah,
line?
that is really good. It gives it layers and depth and like yeah, so much.
Hey,
Yeah,
the scene needs to have a purpose of
right,
not just two people interacting,
right.
right? What's the purpose? What's trying to happen? Or can it add to this arc you're trying to develop for your
Yeah,
character?
yeah. So I think a lot. I personally believe everyone's got a book in them. I mean, I have so many people, and I know people have different what they feel like, different writing styles or different. Like I can't write. People say all the time. I think a lot of times that's not true. I think people's voices, yes, the mechanics and grammar, I get all that, but
Oh
I
yeah,
think
but you can
I
get
think
help with
everyone
that.
is, yeah, but everyone's a creative, and I think I've heard so many people say they can't write, and then I'll see something because maybe it's an activity in a small group Bible study or something that write a psalm or something, and you hear their psalm, and you're just like, oh my gosh, you are an incredible writer. So, I mean, what do you feel like is like some of what prevents people from embarking what you did? Like this is later in
Oh
your
yeah,
life,
yeah,
and you just
yeah.
say, I'm gonna just start writing to pub. I mean,
Well, there's two things I think. One is fear of failure, and the second is you get hung up.
yeah,
So let me talk to both of those. Um, Fear of failure, putting it out there.
mm,
You have to be willing to take a really bad review,
yeah,
a scathing review. Those hurt. Those are awful. But you have to be willing to do it. So are you willing to do that? Are you brave enough to do that?
mm,
I used to go to this writing group, and there'd be people in that group, Travis, that had worked on their books for years.
mm,
And I'd think, oh my goodness, I work on a book for, a few months and I'm ready. I
Right.
gotta
Yeah.
get that
Let's
thing
get it
done. I
out.
could not work on something for a
I
year.
couldn't
And
either.
just polishing it over and over
Yeah.
and thinking, is it good enough? Right? You know,
Yeah.
and then there's the getting hung up part. Some people may call it writer's block. Maybe
Mhm.
that's a better term for it, but I'll be writing along and then I'll think, what word do I need here? You know, and I kind of think about it and I give myself about 30 seconds
Mhm.
to kind of think, you know, and then finally I just write a word in there and I highlight it and I move
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
because they say, get it down, get the story down. Don't get hung up on that one word in
Sure.
that one paragraph.
Yep.
Get it down. When you 99% of the time, when you go back and read that word pops into your head and you know what it should have been, you
Mhm.
couldn't think of it at the time or you couldn't phrase it.
Right.
But can you imagine if you sat at your computer for an hour trying to formulate that sentence? No,
Yeah.
you just keep writing.
Right.
People really stress
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people can't get past that, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think even like just generally like any output of something creative you do is a risk. I mean, there is a so I mean,
Yeah.
I think I understand when people I'm not wired that way to kind of I guess uh, I'm kind of wired less about what people care. So like I feel like for me and there's probably wounds in that too of like kind of walls that are just like it's whatever, you know, but I definitely know that yeah, that for some people is a real struggle of like the vulnerability behind that. So I respect that of like, hey, you know, this is and for some people too, the writing that they want to do is just for them. Or I know of someone I was
It
just talking to
can be.
recently. Yeah, and that's totally cool. Like
Yeah.
someone that he's writing poetry and it sounds like he's really good at it, but he's writing it for just himself and like this his friends. And that's
Yeah.
awesome. I just
I don't want to be that
yeah,
poet laureate or something. Yeah.
there's no judgment towards any creative thing like that that's not for the world.
Hmm.
But I do think that's kind of one of the things that I think is a passion point of mine is encouraging people to, like you said, take the risk. And I do think everyone has a gift to share. So I
Mhm.
very much am about, you know, but yeah, but you know, I respect that, but maybe the world needs that. You know, maybe someone could really be cheered up by a funny novel or by what you're saying about
Exactly.
suffering. You know what I mean? So,
Right. Or they can relate to something you said and they think, that happened to me. I'm not alone.
right,
I'm not the
exactly.
only one in the world that
Yep,
happened to.
yep,
You know?
for sure. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I just think too bad in our world today, everyone's willing to, say these terrible things because you're kind of hiding
Mm-hmm.
behind the
Mm-hmm.
internet, right?
Right,
You don't have to say it to their face. You can
right,
write a review and say,
right, right.
oh my
Yeah,
goodness. I don't know how we got here, but we are.
yeah.
So, but you're like you said, you kind of have to take that for a grain of salt. Were they having a bad
Mm-hmm.
day? Are they
Yeah.
just a bad person? I mean, why
Mm-hmm.
would you write a review like some of these are?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, no, I've seen reviews on podcasts and just different things too, where it's just like the level of your almost rage against I mean it's like how is I mean, oh my gosh, you know, it's just people are trying, you know, they're out there. So
Well, the crazy part too is you'll say, my novel is this.
yeah.
My novel is a clean and wholesome romance. You'll get a review. I wish it was steamier. I already told you it
Wrong
wasn't.
category. Wrong
Right,
category.
right. I already
So
told you it wasn't. Why
right.
did you buy that and feel
A lot
compelled
of
to
people don't read
complain?
stuff. Yeah, a lot of people are like, yeah. Yeah. So okay, so I want to, as we kind of get to sort of the ending here, kind of wrapping all this up, there's a beautiful line, one of my favorite lines, and it's by Saint Irenaeus, who said, "The glory of God is man fully alive." Do you feel the most fully alive when you're creating and writing? Do you just feel like, you know, you're doing important things for the world in other ways? And I'm sure that's valuable for you. You've kind of shared that with America's Kids. But like, is there something even like, even more so that you feel like where you just feel like you're at your most alive creating?
I do. I think that's a really good line. The one thing I try to do in all of my stories is maybe have a theme of something,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've had a foster child that aged out.
Mm-hmm.
That was in one of my books. Maybe teach somebody something, but under the context of humor and a good story, or, a very interesting story around it.
Mm.
I've written Christian romance,
Hmm.
and I did think one really great comment I got was, your books are not preachy,
Yeah.
but they make you feel good, and you do feel that
Hmm.
the closeness to
Sure.
God, but it's not like you're saying it has to be this
Yeah.
certain way or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I talk a lot about like Christian art. I've read a lot about of sort of some critiques in that. I think a lot of times we tend to see, like in movies that we can talk about that are real cheesy or kitschy and stuff like that. There's a feeling that a lot of Christian art and whether it's films and writing can be like what you're saying, preachy or propagandistic, where it's kind of like,
Uh,
and I think people get offended, not even by that, hey, that's a beautiful message. It's by that you don't think that I can just come across this on my own, or like,
right, or
and
conclude it on my own, right?
exactly right. And I
Mhm.
think like good writing, that's why I think a lot of some of the best, fiction writers being, Catholic, Tolkien, so many, because they're writing in paradox, and they're writing in such a way that the the, the light and darkness converges, and they're not necessarily having to separate those out and say, well, but this is the light, people see because
Right, right. No, how true.
as the
How
reader,
true.
you're seeing the light. Let me find the light and discover it. And then by my own discovery, I think it's a more powerful conclusion than you continuing to. And I really think behind that, it's fear. I think that's there was a critic of, who is a Christian writer, who would often say that his critique of a lot of the Christian art like that was, it's the fear. It's the fear of the unsaid. If I don't say it
Ah,
enough times, they're not going
yeah,
to get it. But that's
right,
fear is what's driving that.
right. They also talk about too on the nose writing, where
Mm,
you don't let your reader make their own conclusions.
mm,
And new writers do this, and I'm sure I suffered from it too, but I try not to anymore. Paint the scene and let them figure out what are they looking at,
mm.
versus saying, now that's a tree and that's a
Right,
piece of,
right, right.
just paint the scene, let them figure it out.
Yeah,
Don't tell them this character is going through an emotional crisis. The show don't tell.
right,
That's a
right,
really
right.
popular,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
when I first started, I did struggle with that. I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? But it's so true.
Mm,
Put them in a situation, show what's going on, but don't tell. You
yeah,
know, Ronald is struggling with mental health issues.
sure.
Well, show
Show.
him struggling.
Mm,
You know.
yeah, yeah. I love that. That that's yeah, that's really helpful. So, what you and I, as both writers, we want to avoid what Ambrose Bierce once said. And we said the covers of this book are too far apart. That cracks me up. There's a lot we could get out of there. That's probably not very good. But um, so, any closing thoughts about just your writing? We will in the show notes have links to like your Amazon page or anything else to
Oh, sure,
find your
sure.
books and stuff like that. But any closing thoughts you want to take us out on as far as any of this conversation?
Well, I doubt I would have tried to do this if I hadn't sort of done that really rash decision just to, you don't quit your job every day of the week, right? Um, but it's been very rewarding. And one thing I'd say though is uh, you need to be persistent and you need to keep going.
Hmm.
A lot of times I go, am I good enough? Should I
Hmm.
keep going?
Yeah.
And then an email will come in and say, I love that book.
Mm.
I really
Yeah.
related to this. And you're like, okay, God played a role in that
Yeah.
because,
Right.
the timing was perfect. It kept me
Exactly.
going.
Yeah. No, that's
You,
well
you,
said.
do- you need that. But don't give up. Don't judge yourself too harshly. If you enjoy it, do it. You're like you said, Travis, your stories are worth being told. You know,
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and everyone's voice and brain has a unique thing to share with
yes.
the world and give to the world. And I love that. That's such a good reminder what you said of keep going. I think they talk about even like in podcasts, like I can't remember the average number of podcasts, but it's not very big, and people quit. But and
Yep.
that's fine. And there's good reasons to quit things too. But I
Mhm.
do think a lot of it is just that it's just like, yep, haven't seen the light at the end yet, or haven't gotten that, maybe divinely sent email like you just said that, kind of keeps you going. But I think there's something to be said for resilience and creativity and just,
And
keep,
I think it's almost like a snowball rolling down a hill. Starts really small, and you
yep,
think, this
yeah,
is, really great what I'm doing. But then more people read your books and you write more books and more people read your books. And pretty soon, you've got a big snowball. And there's a lot to discover in terms of, oh, I've never written this. I've never
yeah,
written that.
yeah, yeah,
Romance, people, it gets a bad rap, but it shouldn't.
yeah. Well, at the heart of romance, what is it? I mean,
Um,
I'm putting you right in the heavy spot
yeah,
here.
no, that's
What is
a
at the
good.
core of Rome? I mean,
I think the core is the attraction that you're trying to write about. How do two people find each other and then
hmm,
fall in love?
hmm,
I mean, how does that even happen,
yeah,
right? Right? Um, but it's the building up of that too, right?
hmm,
You might say, that person's interesting. Or in the one I'm writing right now, they're forced to work together. That's a
hmm,
good one, because you put them together. Come
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know. And they don't like each other. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't like you. But then you start to see their change,
right,
right?
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
And all of a sudden the reader is rooting for them to get
right.
together. Yes, yes, they got to get together. That's
That
to me
that
romance. Romance isn't all
yeah,
the kissing or the
yeah, yeah,
making out or the this
yeah,
and that,
yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good kind of distilling it down, and it's like Hallmark movies have that down to a science. I mean, take those like ingredients and like just change out the characters a
They
bit.
really do.
But I mean,
They
that's one
really
of the
do.
funny
But I would
stereotypes.
also say Hallmark movies maybe are a little too repetitive in
Yeah,
that regard.
yeah. Well, that would be the yeah. It's like
You
you've
know what
seen
I
one, you've
mean?
seen them all about Christmas and all
Yes.
that stuff.
Where I hope people don't say that about my books because I try to make them all different. They're all unique. The characters are all different.
Yep,
And uh, and I do feel like I'm writing real people.
right.
Somebody said that to me too. They said, "Oh, I can relate to your characters."
Yeah, no, that's such high praise. I mean, and it sounds like you really are. I'm kind of thinking like, I wonder if I just picture you like, okay, what area, what niche right now can I pioneer to now be the next? So hockey was the last one,
Oh,
the latest craze. Beekeeping and romance, like what are the?
right.
It's, your brain. I'm going bird watchers and like maybe that's
Oh,
the
I
new
know.
frontier for you. But yeah,
Well, that's funny. Well, maybe I'll hit on it. There's a lot of follow the leader
yeah,
syndrome in
yeah.
romance,
Oh, I'm
right?
sure. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
then yeah, exactly.
Could you hear that?
Nope,
Thunder.
no thunder's coming. Wow.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for being on today. This was really a fun conversation for me.
Well, thank you for having
Yeah,
me.
I
I
love this
appreciate it.
topic. Yeah, and I love what you're doing. I love what you're, just kind of continuing to generate creative things and not be an outlet for you. And it's always been fascinating to me, and as fellow writers and friends as well. So, yeah, really, really cool.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I hope you found something helpful, hopeful, or thought-provoking. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to any resources mentioned in the podcast. And we also have links in the notes for our own resources to check out. We would really love to hear from you. And we're also really grateful for your support by sharing the podcast episodes with your friends and family and leaving a rating and review. May we all regain and maintain our wonder, hope, and inspiration as we look at our ordinary through new and fresh eyes.